So today I'm talking about Into the Outdoor, the eighth and final studio album by Led Zeppelin. And my original idea for the whole title, thumbnail, and concept for the video was going to be similar to the one I did for The Doors, The Soft Parade, which was one of my most successful videos. And that was, I was going to pose the question, is this their worst album? But then I researched the album and I didn't feel it would be right to say that because there were some things that happened in the years before this album came out. And keep in mind, this was the longest gap between albums. It was 3 years since the last one. But there were things happening that were very tragic. And for that reason, I didn't feel it would be appropriate to call this their worst album, even though I have done rankings of this band and I have put it at the bottom. But that's just a ranking video. But I want to talk about all the difficult things they had to go through. And even though it might rank towards the bottom, it's still a really good album. You have to consider that Led Zeppelin really sets the bar high. The first 6 albums are near perfect album, and the 2 after that are still very good. So let me get Into the Outdoor is their 8th studio album. It was released on August 22nd, 1979. It's celebrating 45 years. They recorded it in 3 weeks in November and December of 1978. They recorded it at Polar Studios in Stockholm, Sweden, which actually belongs to the band ABBA, and it was released on the Swan Song Records label. Now, why is this a sad history? For me, the biggest thing was back in 1977, Robert Plant's son, Karak, passed away when he was 5 years old due to complications from a stomach virus. So because of that, the band was in a really bad place. There is one song in the album that's dedicated to him. I'll talk about that pretty soon. Another reason the band was struggling is that they left the UK to avoid paying taxes, and because of that, it was over 2 years before they were able to go back to that country and tour. So that was another factor. All these things happening led them to name the album Into the Outdoor because they said it was trying to get through the outdoor as going through difficult periods. The album is a little different than the previous Led Zeppelin albums because most of the writing was done by bass player and keyboardist John Paul Jones and vocalist Robert Plant. The other 2 members of the band, who were drummer John Bonham and guitarist Jimmy Page, were fighting their demons during that time. John Bonham was struggling with alcoholism and Jimmy Page was battling a heroin addiction at that time. So a lot of the songs in the album were mostly done by Robert Plant and John Paul Jones. Jimmy Page and John Bonham would come to the studio at night and do their parts. John Paul Jones was also inspired by his Yamaha GH1 synthesizer that he had recently purchased, and you can hear this on the album. Later, that's going to be something that critics are going to be complaining about. I'll talk about that towards the end. So they recorded a bunch of songs. There were even songs that were left off the album, such as Wearing and Tearing, Ozone Baby, and Darlene. But they were left off this album and included on the Coda album, which would come out 3 years after this. The album has 4 songs on side 1 and 3 songs on side 2, so let's talk about those right now. The opening track is In the Evening, and I think this is probably one of the best songs on the album. I think for me, this reminds me of something that could have been on the Physical Graffiti album. It had that type of sound. The intro is very cool because Jimmy Page used a violin bow and guitar effect called the Gizmotron, and that created these unique sounds in the opening section of the song. I like the song because there's a contrast between the heavy and the light. There are some more heavier guitar riffs in the main part, and in the middle section is a little quieter. So this is probably one of the best songs on the album. But after this is a song that I don't like that much called Southbound Suarez. And it's a very bouncy piano song. I guess I can call it that. John Paul Jones plays the piano on this one, and the idea behind this song was to create something that sounded like a New Orleans bar room, and it's also one of the few songs where Jimmy Page didn't receive a writing credit. So after this, the song Fool in the Rain, which is probably another one of my favorite songs. I think it's just a very catchy song. They use a samba rhythm in the middle and then use polyrhythms throughout the song. This was the band's attempt to do something different. This was also released as a single and it did pretty well. It reached 21 on the Billboard Hot 100. Later I'll be talking about what the critics thought of this album, and in general they didn't like the album that much, but this song, Fool in the Rain, was one of the songs that the critics liked the best. This is also the last official single that was released in the US before the band broke up in 1980. Closing out side one on the album is the song Hot Dog, which is a country rockabilly type of song. They were inspired by Elvis Presley and Ricky Nelson. And I'll be honest, I don't really like this song that much. I know some Led Zeppelin fans like it, but I don't think it really fit the band very well. But with that being said, it's not that bad. Now we get to side two of the album, and it opens with a 10-minute song called Carouselambra. And this was one of the songs that a lot of the critics didn't like. I have mixed feelings about this one. I kind of feel it's long, but it has its moments. Kind of feels similar to the type of song that the band Rush would do in the 80s, but it's a long song with a lot of synth, and I think it sounds a little strange. For example, there's one part at about like 7 minutes into the song, and it just sounds like 80s new wave. But before that, there's one part in the song where I think it's around the 4-minute mark, and it just sounds like classic Led Zeppelin. So I think I like that section of the song a lot, but with all the synth and all that, I think it kind of gets too much. But in general, I think it's kind of strange, but it's not too bad. So out of all Led Zeppelin songs, that would probably be one of my least favorites, but it's pretty good. So now following this is one of my favorite Led Zeppelin songs of all time. So it's a ballad called All My Love. This was a tribute to Robert Plant's son Karak, who, like I mentioned before, passed away while they were on their 1977 North American tour. I didn't know this until I started researching this album for this video, and I think it's a great song. I also think it's similar to the type of music that Robert Plant would be doing during his solo career in the 80s. I think sometimes I hear the song and I forget that it's Led Zeppelin. Sometimes I think it's a Robert Plant solo song, but no, it's Led Zeppelin, and one of my favorite Led Zeppelin songs of all time, possibly a top 10 song for me. The final song is called I'm Gonna Crawl, which is one of their blues tracks inspired by the 60s soul music. They mention Wilson Pickett and Otis Redding as inspirations. I think the song is okay. Not one of my favorites, but it's not a bad Let's talk about the album artwork and packaging. It kind of had a gimmick because the outer sleeve was made to look like a plain brown paper bag, which was similar to those Led Zeppelin bootlegs that were going around. There were different variants, and you had to open the bag to find out which album you were going to get. So when you bought the album, you couldn't really see which version that you were getting. Now, I don't know if this was a good marketing trick or not, because it kind of made it difficult for collectors who want to buy all the versions of it. But basically, the picture shows a man in a bar, and he's burning a Dear John letter, or in other words, a breakup letter with 6 onlookers of people in the bar. And the picture is based on an old bar in New Orleans, Louisiana, like many other albums. And it was designed by Storm Thorgerson of Hypnosis. Let's talk about what the critics thought about this. I guess the reviews were mixed. For example, Robert Christgau of The Village Voice said it was lacking in the lyrics department, but he also said that it was their best album since Houses of the Holy from 1973. But I definitely disagree with that, because I think Physical Graffiti is a masterpiece. But he also said, the tuneful synthesizer pump on side 2 confirms my long-held belief that this is a real good art rock band. Then he goes on to say, the Lollapalooza hooks on the first side confirms the world's long-held belief that this is a real good hard rock band. So I can agree with what he's saying there. They were trying to be a little more experimental in this album, but there was some more hard rock stuff being on side 1 and the experimental stuff on side 2. But like I said, the reviews were kind of mixed. Most of the scores were about 3 out of 5, but the Daily Telegraph gave it 1 star and the Village Voice gave it a B+. So the reviews were mixed. And it's also a sad album for a few reasons. Because one, the band broke up after this album and they never really got back together. And I'm not counting these little reunions here and there, but they never really got back together as a band. And also, drummer John Bonham died a little over a year after this album came out on September 25th, 1980. So that's another reason why it's a sad album. But with that being said, in my opinion, I think it's a good album. But compared to the rest of the discography, it's one of the weaker ones. So if I have to rank them, not counting Coda, I'd probably put this at the end. But at the same time, it's better than almost anything that came out in 1979, because that's what Led Zeppelin was. Let me know in the comments, what do you think of Into the Outdoor? Do you like the songs? Are there some songs you like? Are there some songs you don't like? Let me know. I've done a few Led Zeppelin reviews over the years, so I'm going to link my most recent review of Presence that I did 3 years ago. Stick that right there. It's the 45th anniversary video. And in the meantime, thanks for watching. Please like this video. It helps me with the YouTube algorithm. Please subscribe if you're not already. I do rock and metal reviews, rankings, and more, as well as classic album reviews. I will see you in the next one.